So way back, quite a number of years ago, I wanted to add more interesting line variation to my drawings. And specifically, I wanted a fountain pen that could give me line variation like a dip pen. I felt that those kind of lines were more elegant, thin, thick, and then thin again. It's the kind of lines I see in many manga and comics. So I started looking out for fountain pens with flexible nibs. I found the Noodler's Ahab. It was pretty affordable and it did the job. But in my own experience, the ink didn't really flow that well, especially when I was flexing a lot. So I had to tinker a lot with this pen to make it more flexible and to get the ink to flow better. And then I saw this very popular video online. It looked amazing. But the Namiki Falcon was a pen that cost over $100. I had only been willing to spend about $20 for a pen so far. But after a lot of thought, I bought it. So this was my first super pricey premium pen, and it could do what most other modern fountain pens can't do. It could flex. But interestingly, most people describe it as soft rather than flexible, and it's also marketed as soft. So I was kind of happy with it, but I was still in hunting mode, and I was looking through the internet and I found that there were these people called Nibmeisters who could actually make a fountain pen nib more flexible. There are a few of them, but the popular one at that time was John Mortishaw, and the other one was Greg Minuskin. I got Greg to modify my Namiki Falcon nib, and he did make it more flexible for a fee, and it was not cheap. I was starting to spend more money on my art tools, but since I was working as an illustrator, why not? It was an investment. But by that time, something else caught my attention. Nibmeisters like Greg Minuskin were also selling vintage fountain pens, and I started reading up that vintage fountain pens had nibs that were truly flexible and not just soft. Some of the pens would have stiff nibs, but some would have really flexible nibs, and the most flexible kinds were given the name wet noodle. So I started emailing Greg Minuskin and asking him about vintage fountain pens. Because they were so pricey, I wanted to know as much as I could about them before I actually bought them. He did answer my questions, and eventually I did buy quite a few of them over a period of time. So this is my collection so far. So vintage fountain pens have gold nibs. The number on the nibs tell you how big the nibs are. They are really old, it could be up to a century old. Most of them had a previous owner. They have wider feed channels than modern fountain pens. Because of the generous ink flow, they are more likely to leak if I place them upside down in my bag. So I usually find ways to keep them upright when I'm carrying them about. They are made with different materials like hard rubber or acrylic. They have interesting filling systems, very different from cartridges and converters. And the most common is this lever filling system. It's very old school, but I found it pretty cool. It's interesting to see how people 100 years ago came up with a solution to how to suck ink into a pen. The one downside about lever fillers is that they have rubber sacks in them, and if I put waterproof ink in the pen, it usually destroys the rubber sac after some time, and then it becomes a gooey mess. That's why personally I prefer to use eyedroppers, which I can open them up and then drop ink in using a syringe or an eyedropper. This is good for waterproof ink because there are no rubber sacks in there. So as an artist, I prefer eyedroppers because I use waterproof inks for the lines, and then I can use a watercolor wash over the lines without the lines bleeding. So this is what I've drawn with vintage fountain pens over the years. I feel it made my lines look a lot more interesting, and I really like the kind of line variation it gave me. The feeling of a flexible gold nib on paper is really delightful, and it got me drawing a lot more. And over the years, Greg Minuskin has become a dear friend to me. And not just because of pens, we don't just talk about pens, we talk about lots of other things as well. So I've invited him on a Skype call so he could tell us more about vintage fountain pens and nibs, since he's the expert on this subject. So here is Nibmeister Greg Minuskin. Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
So you are based in California?
Southern California, about 8 miles from the coast where surfing was born, Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, yes. Very Mediterranean, It's very nice. No humidity. Throughout average about 330 days of sunshine. Never too hot. Never gets beyond 24, 26 degrees centigrade.
So you're a Nibmeister.
Mm-hmm.
How did you become a Nibmeister?
Well, I originally was working for a high-end luxury watch company and decided to change my career path at that point when I was living in Beverly Hills. And I decided to sign up with a very well-known nib retipping person and learn the skill and craft and the secret of nib retipping, which I still practice today. All right, so what most people do, there are obviously other Nibmeisters out there, but what most people do is they'll either straighten nibs or regrind them for special grinds. Everything from stubs to broad italics to needlepoint. I take it one step further. I do also repair and restoration of nibs. And on my website, I have a lot of before and after photos of nibs that have broken off tips or cracks, and I repair both. I also restore fountain pens completely as well. Oh, okay. Well, I'm blessed by being in Southern California with a large flea market almost every weekend here in Southern California. And there's usually between 400 and 800 vendors at these flea markets, and I have developed relationships with dozens of them where they specifically save me fountain pens. So when I attend a flea market, they sell them to me direct. But I also find the fountain pens in the wild, meaning passing by a display, of basically stuff, and there'd be watches out and maybe old radios and whatnot, and there'd be a fountain pen. So it's both ways. How do I restore a vintage pen? Usually the ink sac is completely rotted away, and old ink is stuck in the feed. So I have to take it apart, remove the old ink sac, find a new sac that will work in the pen if it's a lever fill or the bulb filler, and they're all available. And then take apart the feed and the nib and put them in an ultrasonic bath with a special chemical to remove the old ink so that the new ink that we put in the pen will flow. And then assemble everything and make sure it writes afterwards.
I think since you're a Nibmeister, you also kind of make sure the nib is super smooth or something, right?
Right. Well, not necessarily smooth here, just make sure that the tines are aligned and that the feed is properly aligned so that when the pen is restored, it should be aesthetically pleasing, but it should also be able to, as a useful tool, be able to write. Because a lot of times people do restorations just for the aesthetics, when in fact it should be done also for the usability and functionality. And then that's where my skills come in to make it functional as well.
So how old are some of these vintage fountain pens?
Usually the oldest ones would be early eyedroppers, which is, I have an example here to show you. This is a very, very fine Waterman silver slip cap, and it's a eyedropper filler, which means that you unscrew the barrel with the section as such, and you fill up the ink inside. It's like a bottle, and then you screw the section back on, and it's a very tight thread. And so this one would be from about 1906, 1907. And it's a sterling filigree overlay Waterman's. And this is a very valuable one.
I like these ones with the metal because it feels like if you put them in your bag, they won't really crack because the metal protects them from bending.
Right. So this is a very fine one. And then there's later models. This one is unique. This is a steganographer's wall from, I believe, the 1930s. And it's an early green plastic, and it's faceted, as you can see. See how it's playing with the light.
Yeah.
What's really cool about this is the way it fills. It's got a little bulb on the end, and you squeeze that little bulb and to suck up the ink out of the ink bottle. But this is a very rare pen too, and it's very thin. And stenographers, people that took notes for like in courts and whatnot, would use this thin pen. This is a Waterman 100-year pen with a lever, and you pull that lever up this way, and it depresses a sac inside the barrel, and at the same time you put this in bottle of ink, and then when you release the lever back into its resting position, which is in the same horizontal plane as the pen, the sac opens up and it basically drinks up the ink into the pen. This one has a phenomenal extra fine super flex 14 karat gold 100-year Waterman nib.
Why is it called Super Flex?
Because if you take your thumbnail and you go and you press down, it's hard to do on the camera, this will flex and splay out to almost 3 millimeters.
Wait, three is very big.
Yeah.
Usually I only hear 2 mm.
And these Watermans, which are very desirable, 100-year Watermans, and they're hard to find because they're usually in poor condition. They used a very unstable plastic to make them when they were new, and so they're hard to find in good condition today. It's a Waterman's 100-year.
Okay, this is like the 100th anniversary version.
No, actually, it was a marketing thing. They said that the pen would last 100 years.
Has it been 100 years yet?
This is from the 30s, so not quite yet.
Almost. How do they compare to modern fountain pens in terms of flex?
Vintage flex, the alloy of the gold, in most cases 14 karat, which is 58.5%. And that 58% of gold to the rest of the metal in the nib, which is an alloy, which means other metals, mixed in with it, makes the pen ideally for flexibility without any issues as far as it breaking or overspringing the nib. So the 14 karat is the ideal ratio of gold to other metals like nickel or copper that they alloy, because you never really buy pure gold because it's in its pure state, it's not really usable. Even high-end wristwatches are only 18 karat gold, which is 75% gold and 25% other metal. If you made it any more higher content of gold, like 22 karat, it'll be too soft for practical use.
I guess gold is kind of soft because you bite it, then it's a teeth marks on it or something, right?
Yeah, so you want some rigidity, but you want also malleability. So there's the golden ratio is 14 karat for a flexible nib.
But then there are some modern pens with 14K gold nibs, right? Like the Namiki Falcon and all that. But they don't seem to be as flexible as some of the vintage fountain pens you carry. Why is that?
Excellent question, Andrew. And the reason is that while it has the gold content that's similar to the same as 14 karat as the vintage nibs, the process of making those nibs is not the same, and like the annealing process and the alloying process is not quite the same, and so it doesn't have the same properties and response and performance as a vintage pen. That's why vintage pens are preferred today. For artists, the best pen to start off with, to have the best experience without spending too much money, but also at the same time having the best first-time experience, is a Waterman 52 with a number 2 nib. They were manufactured from the late 1890s all the way to the 1930s. So there's a wide range of models and styles and sizes. And as long as it has a flexible number 2 nib, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, I have those.
So you understand the value of a Waterman's 52. This one happens to be a nice ripple with gold-filled trim.
Yes, I got this from you.
Yeah, well, there you go. One of my loyal clients. It's so nice.
And the other one is you usually recommend the Waterman's 12 for if it's an eyedropper version, but it has the same number 2 nib. Right?
Correct, yeah. And that's for artists more so because you could put almost any ink in there with no worries about the ink sac being destroyed by, permanent inks that a lot of artists use.
Yeah, like waterproof inks. It tends to destroy the ink sac.
Correct, yeah.
Any other brands that you should look out for other than Waterman's 52?
Oh, absolutely. Conklin is another brand. Early Conklins are really good. They're the crescent filler and black hard rubber, similar to the one that you just showed me, and that you have as a Waterman. They use the same material, the black hard rubber. Look up Wall Eversharp. That's another great flexible nib. Some of them are stiff, but you can find them, and those are really priced well. maybe Todd. Those are really nice. Swan, maybe Todd's. Those are really, you can get nice pens with flexible nibs as well in that brand. So that would be kind of the major ones without getting into too much of the weeds, the ones that are more collectible.
So they all appear on your site every once in a while.
Yes. Recently, few and far between, because it's been difficult to find these pens of late, because everybody, first of all, who wants one has one, and second of all, it's not an inexhaustible supply. There's a lot of people still selling pens, but finding these pens is not as easy as it used to be. Let's put it that way. So they're becoming more and more difficult to obtain. Usually you see a more preponderance of these pens at pen shows as far as people selling them. And the more common ones would be the ones that are ring tops, so versus the ones with clips, because those the collectors don't like, but they perform just as well because they have the same nib as the ones with clips. So.
Okay, do you have any of those?
A ring top. Let me see here. Well, what do you know? Look at this. I've got a ring top.
Oh, that's a ring top. That's the one you wear as a necklace around your neck?
Yeah, because women didn't have pockets, so they wore these around their necks in 1905, 1910. Only men had pockets back then, considering the dress of the time.
Oh, okay.
The nib was just equally nice. This happens to be a very, very fine, beautifully engraved sterling navy Todd from about maybe 1914.
And it has a flexible nib.
Oh, yes. It's very flexible. Let's see if I can show the audience.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Wow, that's pretty cool. And oh yeah, but is there a chance that people can spring the nib? That means break the nib if you spread it too far?
Yeah, you can, but the deal is that you can usually feel when the resistance is too much before you go over and spring it. A lot of people go past that, and then they come to me because I'm the nib doctor. So I have to fix it. So with eBay, it's a buyer and seller's market, and a buyer beware because the pen may or may not be restored. I literally get 2 or 3 emails a week from people saying, I bought this pen on eBay and then I got it in the mail and discovered this was wrong, that was wrong. There was a crack in the vent hole. The tipping was gone. There's no ink sac. The feed is damaged. So when you buy with me, you know it's all restored and it's ready to go. And I even provide writing samples to it to attest to its restoration.
What is the price range? I know that it's not that cheap, but it's not too crazy either.
In US dollars, usually between 90 and 200 is a sweet spot for a fine writing instrument restored. The only advantageousness of a modern flex that I can come up with versus the vintage one is that a modern pen, if you're traveling, won't leak. All right, especially going to airplane, those who travel with the pressure change of the cabin, right? These tend to have feeds that are more suited to modern, travel. So if you do have a vintage fountain pen and you're going to take it with you on a plane, I highly, highly recommend just drain the ink out of it and fill it when you get to your destination. Don't leave it in there because it turns into a mess. What happens is that the air pressure in the plane changes to the air pressure inside the pen, and the air pressure in the pen wants to escape to the air pressure in the plane, and it bubbles the ink out and makes a mess in the cap and whatnot.
All right, and it's more so because, I think you showed me another time, it's because the feet of vintage fountain pens have a wider channel, right?
Correct. The inks were thicker back then. Excellent, Andrew. And the inks were thicker back then, so they had to have more of a deeper channel to allow the inks to flow. And unfortunately, in a pressure-changing environment, that is detrimental as far as a mess. I mean, if you don't mind cleaning up the mess, that's okay, right? But it's the feed channels are definitely larger and more generous in a vintage pen, which gives them those speciality of writing that people love today.
Yeah, but that's why the vintage fountain pen does not railroad as much, or maybe doesn't railroad at all, right? But maybe a Namiki Falcon might railroad if you flex it too much too often.
Well, it's true, but I also offer the service of modifying the Namiki Falcon feed with a 5-step proprietary process which makes then the feet behave exactly like a vintage fountain pen. And I had this 5-step process of modifying it, which is a proprietary process, as I just said.
Is this new or?
No, I've had it for about 6 years now.
Okay.
And it makes the feed perform unbelievably well.
Okay, so if you modify the Namiki Falcon, you can modify the nib, make it more flexible, and make the feet wide or something to do with the feet, and so that the ink will flow more generously. So
Right.
so it won't railroad, maybe not at all, hopefully.
And I have a package deal which I provide where if somebody wants the full pen spa treatment of not only the nib, flexing, extra flex, redrawing the tip, but also the increasing the generosity of the feed. I mostly do needlepoint. I do extra fine. I work, though, in 0.1 millimeter increments because a Japanese fine and a Western fine, or a Western medium and a Japanese medium, they are not the same. The standard's not the same. So by maintaining a decimal sizing of nibs, it keeps everybody on the same page. So usually a needlepoint's 0.1, then you have extra fine, 0.2, 0.3, and then you get to fine, which was like 0.3, 0.4. And then the mediums start at 0.5 to about 0.8, and then 0.9 broad. There's actually 2 types of customers. One is the collector, just restore the nib to what it looked like originally, nothing fancy, just because I want to restore the pen. The other one is I'm a professional or an amateur hobbyist. I want the nib to perform a certain way. I'd like a stub, a signature stub to sign documents or something like that, and they'll make the stub.
The stub is the fat one.
Yeah, so the stub is basically a shovel end, and it makes a fat downstroke and a thin side stroke. And it's very much useful for people that are either wanting a fancy signature because it gives line variation and you can write quickly, or if I make it more of an italic that's sharp, you can do Gothic lettering. But let's say you're just an office professional and you just want fancy. So, for instance, I've done. I have clients who are lawyers who want a nice signature with a little bit of flair. So I'll make a 1 millimeter broad stub. And then on a Mont Blanc, let's say a Mont Blanc 146 or 149. And then that pen is very easy to use to make signatures on legal documents, and it looks kind of nice too. I usually attend, sometime, not this year, I attend the Chicago show. I've attended in the past Washington, D.C., certainly the LA show, that's my home show. San Francisco, I will definitely be there this summer, which is the 3rd weekend in August, I believe. Yeah. And then sometimes I've attended the Dallas show, and I've been to the Miami show as well.
Okay, so that's where you have a table and all the pens are there, and they can try it and buy it straight from you, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I just word to the wise, because my pricing is so good, and I'm not trying to get giant retail, beyond retail pricing, I usually sell out within the first day and a half of a 3-day show. Sometimes shows will have 175 to, I've seen 220 vendors, individual sellers, and they'll be attended by sometimes over 1,000 people a day. It's so crowded you can barely scoot between the crowd. It's like
it's like a Comic-Con for pens.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks, Greg. And
very well, Andrew.
So if you're interested in vintage fountain pens, check out Greg's website, link in the description below. Thanks for watching.